Good morning, my name is Damien Ivory. I run a small RSP in Launceston called Lontel, and we've been doing the NBN for well over 5 years. Now today, in an effort to counter the old adage that the only thing men have ever learned from history is that men don't learn from history. So I'm going to discuss the history of the NBN, and in a future video I'm going to be talking about the politics, which unfortunately is still quite evident within the whole NBN rollout process. So the roots of the NBN date back to when Telstra was privatised. This was done in progressive stages, starting in 1997 with the T1, a sale of 33% of Telstra, and it was listed on the stock exchange. So the government essentially progressively started to sell off the national telco. This was mainly to improve the level of competition for telecommunication services in Australia. The following tranche, T2, followed in 1999 or thereabouts with a further 16%, leaving the government with 51%, still a majority stake in the telco. And this was important because they could still effectively control what Telstra did. Come 2006, Telstra was a further 34%, by far the largest tranche of shares, was sold off by the government. Now, this was an important one because at that point they lost their majority stake and they could no longer direct Telstra to do things in the national interests, and quite rightly, Telstra, being an independent company, could act totally in their own shareholders' interests. Around about the same time, the Howard government had recognised that there was a significant gap in the quality of the internet infrastructure in Australia, and so they invited Telstra to come up with a proposal to definitely significantly improve the broadband. They came back with a proposal to roll out fibre to the node across much of Australia, and probably some fibre in the inner cities. However, it was being run by the Sol Trujillo, the CEO, who was a very combative person who did not believe in regulators, and he had suffered several irritating defeats for him anyway, with the ACCC. The ACCC being the competition regulator in Australia, and they were constantly on Telstra to essentially not frustrate the free market efforts, or competitors in particular, about access to their wholesale infrastructure. So Telstra were forever favouring their own retail arm over their competitors. So the Howard government, when they were selling off another big stake in Telstra, were frequently advised that they should not do this without separating Telstra into two separate companies. One, an infrastructure company that owns all the ducts and the pits, the fibre, the copper cables, the exchanges, everything that's actually physically required to create a service, and then into another company put their retail division. And the intention being that all the retail companies could then compete on a level playing field, and there would be no sort of sweetheart deals between Telstra's retail division and their wholesale division. Telstra had some form on this because the mobile network, which was not under the same level of restrictions as the fixed line network, because it was built after the point where the free market had opened up, Telstra frequently offered, or they would keep the best parts of the infrastructure to themselves. So, for example, when they first rolled out 3G, or NextG as they called it, they only offered that to their own retail arm. They did not offer that to their competitors to sell. So the idea being, of course, is that they wanted to keep that for themselves. Unfortunately, contrary to advice, the Howard government did not divide Telstra up, and they sold it as a complete entity, and that was probably the reason why we had so many issues later when trying to build a new network. So the 2007 election came about. The Howard government, who'd been in office for some time by now, really had no well-formed plan about what to do about broadband. However, the Rudd government, or not the Rudd government, the Rudd opposition, went into the election promising to roll out a fibre to the node network. They would contribute some $4.7 billion, and the rest to be provided by private industry. So they won that election, and they then set about in 2008 putting together a RFP process, request for proposal, and essentially two separate entities bid in that process. The first was a consortium of a number of companies, called themselves the Competitive Carriers Coalition. They, while they bid on the project, they made it quite clear that they would need access to Telstra's copper cables in order to provide this. Telstra was the other party. They put in a very short 12-page bid, and it was declared to be non-conforming. And by non-conforming, it did not meet the requirements of the original proposal. One of the important points was that Telstra only said they would cover some 80 to 90% of the population, whereas the RFP required at least 98%. Now, there are some commentators afterwards who said that that was a ridiculous level. But anyway, that was the proposal. It was also considered very arrogant because, again, this is all under Sol Trujillo, who really kind of felt that they should build the network. Who pretty much, the bid essentially intimated that we can build this network, nobody else can, because if anybody else does, they will need access to our copper. And don't forget, by now, Telstra was now an independent company. There's nothing the government could do to force them to release that copper to anybody else. Figures, there was never any official request for a price from Telstra, but many commentators at the time estimated a figure of around $20 billion just to get access to the copper. Now, this is before any infrastructure, other infrastructure is put in, the nodes and the like. So it was going to be a very expensive project just to deliver a fibre to the node network, which is sort of somewhat ironic because arguably that's what we got many years later, but through different reasons. So the RFP process had collapsed. In 2009, the Rudd government came up with an alternative plan, and this was to roll out fibre to the premises across the entire fixed line footprint. I don't remember exactly what the figure was, but it was about 93%, I believe, and the remainder to be done with a combination of fixed wireless and satellite. Now, they did fibre to the premises not because it was a great technology or because they thought it was the thing that had to be done or they were looking so far into the future. They did it because it was the only way they could get Telstra out of the loop. They had to bypass Telstra completely. Many people say that the Rudd government made a great decision. Yeah, they did, but they didn't do it for the right reasons. So in 2010, the tenders were put together. There were some issues with that. With the initial build, the prices were too high, but eventually they got that sorted out. However, there was another decision that was made, which is called the 121 POI decision. I won't go into great detail on this, but because that could be a subject of another video. But it was a very crucial decision made by the ACCC to change the way that NBN was going to lay out their network. They were originally going to lay it out to some 7 capital cities and bring the network back to there, hand it off to the ISPs who could then take it from there. They were forced by the ACCC to change that to 121 points of interconnect, this place where you hand off to the RSPs. And it is one of those decisions that has arguably dogged the NBN ever since. Even the ACCC has, well, not directly saying they made a mistake. I think they've sort of privately admitted that they did. But anyway, that's another important roadblock to the whole NBN. 2011, the Tasmanian rollout started. It was very much a few test sites. The intention was not to provide any fantastic service, but it was to test out their rollout methods, and they certainly figured a lot of stuff out. At the same time, they also did a deal with Telstra to get access to the pits and the ducts, but they didn't want the copper inside it, but they just wanted to lease those. The main change in Telstra's attitude was caused by, first of all, a change of CEO to a guy called David Theody, who was much more willing to work with the government. And the government used another stick, which hadn't been used earlier, which was that if Telstra didn't come to the party, that they would be denied spectrum, which is something the government gives out for their mobile network. So, cut a long story short, they did a deal, $9 billion, and Telstra would progressively transfer all their network across to the NBN, all their access network. They will get completely out of the access game. 2012, in the lead up to the 2013 election, the Liberal Party were very critical of the whole NBN process. They did not like this government-owned monopoly. People were going to be forced to connect to the NBN. Their old lines were going to be disconnected. And they constantly attacked it for being too expensive and not needed. Nobody needed the sort of speeds that NBN was talking about. I think at that stage, NBN were only saying they were going to provide 100 megabits, so we're not even talking about gigabit speeds or the like. So in the lead up to the 2013 election, by which time the Labour government was in deep trouble, they'd had a change of prime ministers a couple of times, and it never managed to launch a significant campaign against the Liberals around the NBN. The Liberals were allowed to make a lot of things stick to the NBN about it being over budget and behind schedule that in fact were not true. The Liberal Party pointed to the slow pace of the rollout, and this, I think, is a very misleading way to look at things. In the early stage of a project, it's always slow. The actual things on the ground take a long time to set up. It takes a lot of IT and company process setup before you even put the first fibre in the ground. So of course the number of houses passed were pretty slow. But the Liberal Party quite effectively used it as a stick to beat the government with. The Liberal government proposed to change, the Liberal Party, this is before the 2013 election, proposed to change from this full fibre rollout model to a much more, much cheaper, apparently, rollout using the existing copper cables with fibre to the node, and the HFC cables that have so far been used for cable TV and some internet. This they proposed would cost $29.5 billion, not the 45 billion that that was projected to cost for the full fibre to premises rollout. They won that election, and they then set about changing the NBN's model to this fibre to the node and HFC, the multi-technology mix rollout. So I talked to a number of NBN engineers at the time, and because they were still rolling out the FTTP at this point, even though the new government had come into power, nothing was going to change for some time. And in fact, it was a year before they actually told NBN to do a full halt on any further FTTP implementations. But their comment, as in the engineers, they felt like they were really hitting their straps. They had sorted out a lot of the issues, they sorted out a lot of the difficulties in connecting, and they were really able to dramatically improve the pace and also reduce the cost. And this is an important part of fibre to the premises rollouts. And we've definitely seen this in New Zealand. Mike Quigley, the first CEO of NBN, talks about it as well. It's in many ways, rolling out FTTP is like a distributed factory. So unlike, say, building a bridge, where you pretty much do a certain thing once, maybe twice, but that's it. You don't really get any opportunity to get better at it or improve a process or whatever. Fibre to the premises, however, or any technology being rolled out, you do the same thing over and over again, but in different places. If you talk to any manufacturing company that's, say, building buses or the like, I've talked to Elphinstone up on the northwest coast of Tasmania, and they always tell me if they've got an order for 200 buses to be built, the first 2 or 3, they're very lucky to even make a profit on. The actual cost of getting all the bits and pieces sorted out, working out where on the assembly line everybody has to be, where the parts need to be, whether you should be using a bolt or a clip or the like. These take some time to sort out. So in a typical manufacturing run, the first few are done at a significantly higher cost. And it's only maybe a third of the way in that you really start to see the reduction in costs and the improvement in performance of the manufacturing. So it was just the same with FTTP, and this is exactly what Chorus, who are the people who are rolling out fibre to the premises in New Zealand, exactly what they saw. They saw a reduction in the cost per premises of probably about 30 or 40% as they rolled it out. And these cost savings were very much built into NBN's plans and their final budget requirements. However, the Liberal Party were very quick to do the calculations in an alternative way, and when they came into power, they produced a review which has been widely discredited since as coming up with some very woolly mathematics about how much it was going to cost. They even costed up how much it would cost to stop the multi-technology mix rollout and restart the fibre to the premises rollout. And this is where these astronomical figures of $95 billion and 2028 completion date. So the multi-technology mix was rolled out, or they started to roll that out. They came up with some significant issues. The first was that, frankly, it was not as cheap as they expected. The copper quality, again, they were told many times by a lot of the engineers in the know, the quality of the copper in Australia was very poor. Telstra had stopped maintaining it because they knew that at some point it was going to get replaced, and they were right. So this very much drove up the costs of implementing fibre to the node, and it certainly delayed the rollout. I can't remember how many kilometres of new copper cable has been laid, but I believe it can circle the Earth several times. Easily another $10 billion worth of costs. The other problem they had was with the HFC. They had significant problems with quality, with people either not getting the speeds, but more to the point, it was not reliable. People were dropping out. There are several technical reasons for this, but I won't go into. They had to actually stop the rollout of the HFC in order to sort of go back round, fix a lot of the issues, and restart the rollout. This cost NBN a lot of money, because not only did they have to actually go and perform these fixes, but they also lost all the revenue that they would have got had the HFC been working properly. So we come now to 2018-2019, where the rollout is all but finished. It's due to be finished in 2020, the middle of next year. Whether it'll be completed on time and how many people will actually be able to connect is still open to question. But I think many commentators believe that it's taken so much longer to roll out than was originally expected, and so much more to roll out as in terms of the cost from the original proposal that was put to the Australian people back in 2013. And of course, all these issues have very much affected NBN's ability to generate revenue and to have a successful company. So that's pretty much the history of NBN. A lot of the decisions that were made were forced on the government or forced on the people making those decisions. They really had very little option. The classic one being the original fibre to the premises model was very much driven by the circumstances of the day. And for the Liberal Party to turn around and say it was a bad decision is very much rewriting history. And I hope you can see from what I've been talking about that they were very much mistaken. I'll leave it there, and I will be back to you with another video.